Hello, and welcome to Region Locked. Anyone familiar with Sega will tell you the company's history is a rocky one. It was among the biggest hardware developers to come out of Japan in the 1990s, but when consoles turned to disc-based technology, their sales began to falter. Sega's final attempt at a home console was the Sega Dreamcast, a system that still holds a cult following to this day. One of the last games developed by Sega for the device was a love letter to fans filled with the characters and charm that Sega was known for. They called it Segagaga. Released in March 2001, Segagaga is a bizarre RPG that referenced not only the company itself, but also a large number of Sega's games and characters. The name is a play on the term being gaga for something, and in particular, being gaga for Sega. It was chosen in place of the name Sega, as they hoped that reducing the focus on the Sega name would be less intrusive. Often abbreviated to SGGG, the title was directed by Tez Okano, who would later go on to create Gunstar Superheroes and Astro Boy Omega Factor. Although the game was primarily an RPG, it covers a mixture of genres. It defines itself as a Sega Simulator, with the game's plot and story loosely based on the reality of what happened to Sega. In the game's story, Sega is struggling financially against its leading competitor, Dogma. Sega's world marketplace share is a mere 3%, and without any signs of improvement. To fix this, the company plans to get kids from the street and introduce them to the company in the hopes that their management can bring the company back to its former glory. The player takes on the role of one of those kids, Taro Sega. During the initial part of the game, the player is tasked with battling employees from various development studios within the company. This stage of the game talks about how the giant doors of the building are there to keep the employees in rather than keeping everybody else out. The high stress levels of developing games has caused them to become subhuman, something that the game proclaims is the unfortunate truth of the games industry. Nobody has entered the development room in 20 years, and so none of the company's higher-ups really know what is happening at Sega. Sometimes they receive a finished product in exchange for food and water, but eventually somebody has to go in and crack the whip. This initial part of the game plays out like a standard RPG, with each studio being a maze filled with a variety of enemies. Some playful enemy designs are thrown into the mix, ranging from literal cutout photographs of real developers within Sega, bizarre creatures, and various mecha forms of Ralph Macchio, the actor for Daniel LaRusso in The Karate Kid. Unlike typical RPGs, battles don't unfold by exchanging physical attacks. Instead, the fight is an exchange of verbal abuse by commanding your enemy and insulting them. Telling them that they will never have a girlfriend or that their product can't make any money, you will eventually weaken their will and defeat them. With only a single party member and enemy in battle at a time, this is a fairly simple process. There are a number of special attacks that can be used, however, with interesting and unique results. The consequences of failing to defeat an opponent doesn't result in a game over, but instead removes a month of development time from the company, something that is extremely detrimental for the latter part of the game. After taking down an enemy, it's possible that they will want to join you on your quest and will try to negotiate for a job. This is performed through a 10-second segment of exchanging questions in quick succession, including what sort of salary they can expect to receive. After the process of hiring, the game moves into its advertised simulation segment. Each studio brought on board is made up of 7 members, 3 programmers, 3 designers, and a director. These employees make up the total stats for a studio, providing them with stamina, creativity, skill, and speed. This leaves the player with a number of decisions, such as whether they want to create a skilled team to produce a few high-quality products, or just push out fast shovelware in a hope that it will increase profits. There are a total of 4 studios that can be taken on board. After 3 years with the company, the game ends, and different endings can be achieved depending on how well you performed. The only way to fail the game entirely is by running out of funds before the 3 years are over. Dialogue between characters shows the real-life dilemmas that face game developers. The hero wants to create innovative and fresh titles that will attract new customers and help the company thrive. But many will say how such things are hard to achieve and the company's financial security is more important. The game's most well-received element is its homage to Sega's past, with constant cameo appearances, retro music, references to other Sega games, and even bizarre mini-games that throw back to previous Sega titles. There is a huge amount of fan service for Sega veterans. While we doubt many of you will ever get the chance to play Segagaga, we're giving you a warning that this next part of the video details the ending of the game. So if you don't want it to be spoiled, skip to the time displayed on screen. In the game's climax, the player straps himself into an R720 unit, a parody of the Sega R360 arcade unit, which results in him being shot into space. With the evil Dogma Corporation performing a hostile takeover, a huge cast of Sega characters are sent out to battle them. This includes characters like Sonic, Tails, Rystar, a variety of Phantasy Star characters, and the Bad Brothers from the first stage of Golden Axe. The player is pitted against a barrage of enemies in a shoot-'em-up style game. The boss of this stage is a continually upgrading piece of Sega hardware, which after each form is destroyed will morph into the next console generation. This segment is similar to Thunder Force, particularly with the inclusion of an additional vessel reminiscent of the ship's design in Thunder Force 5. Segagaga's director, Tez Okano, would later go on to work on the Thunder Force sequel, Thunder Force 6, which launched on the PlayStation 2. This game was originally in development for the Sega Dreamcast, however, and some of the original assets are used in this final scene. Though the Dreamcast launched to some success in Japan in 1998, their competition was fierce. The impact of the Dreamcast hitting the market was short-lived, and soon after its launch, sales figures began to tank. As a result of some internal arguments, the company decided that the console market was not a secure financial option for the company, and that they should instead dedicate their efforts into becoming a leading third-party developer, which allowed them to work without console restrictions. A result of this internal arguing was lots of staff shuffling, and people both internally and externally thinking that the company was headed to its own demise. When Okano initially pitched the title to Sega's management, many believed his proposal to be a joke. After a second round of fund seeking for the project, it was approved by Hisao Oguchi, the president of the now defunct Sega development team Hitmaker. Okano estimated the total budget for the game to be less than 1/100th of Shenmue, which is known for being a huge financial burden on Sega with a budget of over $70 million. One factor that helped the game's reduced production cost came from Toei Animation, who gave a discount to the developers on all animated footage. Segagaga released at a time when the Dreamcast's future was bleak. Sega's schedule for upcoming high-quality releases was looking sparse, and they needed to do something that would bring in revenue. Just 2 months before the game was released, Sega announced the discontinuation of the Dreamcast. At this stage, Segagaga had been in development for 2 years in secret. Okano was concerned that after development was revealed, anything can happen. This is an important point, as one of the reasons the game was published was because Sega was struggling financially, and they felt that the company wouldn't be portrayed in a negative light within the game. When Segagaga was initially conceived, there were around 300 copyright issues that needed to be resolved within the company. This was later brought down to just 100, meaning some of the game's ideas had to be scrapped or changed. These include the idea of having Sega's famous Sega Saturn mascot in the game, Segata Sanshiro, as well as a Ferrari. The franchises that ended up appearing in the game came as a result of their popularity with fans, as well as the availability from a legal perspective. After the game launched, Okano stated that he was given a marketing budget of around $200. Okano spent over half the budget on a wrestling mask in order to hide his identity during signing events he set up at 4 locations across Akihabara. With support from the head of Sega's PR, Tarashi Takazaki, and Taku Sasahara from Sega AM3, the game was able to obtain a full-page newspaper article, which helped to increase awareness and popularity for the title. The game launched with respectable sales through Sega's online store, ultimately leading to a full retail release. It's not surprising that the game was never localized, as the target audience was extremely limited even within Japan, never mind the rest of the world. The Dreamcast, which had already been discontinued at the time of the game's launch, and Sega's lack of financial stability are both likely contributing factors to the lack of translation. The game also makes heavy use of text, and has a huge volume of characters and cultural elements that simply don't translate well for a Western market. Reworking all of these elements into a narrative that makes sense to Westerners would be time-consuming and expensive. Not only this, but the previously mentioned licensing issues would need to be renegotiated all over again for different markets. Efforts were once made by a group of fans to translate the game, but with no news coming out for almost 4 years at the time of this video, it's unknown whether the game will ever be playable in English. That's all for today, but if you're into weird and trippy games, you might like our video on LSD Dream Emulator. Check out that by clicking the annotation on screen. If you enjoyed this video, we'd appreciate it if you give it a like and maybe even consider subscribing to the channel. We'll be streaming some of the more interesting bits of Segagaga over on our other channel, so join us there and consider subscribing. Thanks for watching.